Hello everyone and welcome to a new and hopefully rather short, I can't promise, but I'll try, talk on North East Ladybirds. I'm hoping this one will be a little different to the others, as I wanted to take a chance to share with you a little personal project I've been working on this year, largely inspired by your own sightings. Now, many of you will have seen updates along the way, but really now that 2022 is coming to an end, I wanted to provide a quick insight into a year's worth of Ladybird recording. And I guess to highlight the fantastic diversity of these insects out there to be discovered in our region. Now, owing to the number of species out there to be found, I've split this talk into two videos. The second will follow shortly, I hope. Until then, I hope you like spots because you'll be seeing a fair few of them. But more so, I hope you feel inspired to go out there and find a few of these ladybirds for yourselves. But first, who am I and why am I waffling at you about ladybirds today? So for those of you I haven't met, who I suspect that's the most of you actually, I'm James. I'm Senior Naturalist with the Natural History Society of Northumbria. And outside of work, I focus most of my time on recording and enjoying plants. I'm a botanist foremost, but one which will hold my hands up and say that I have a secret side passion for ladybirds. So before we go any further, what exactly is a ladybird year list? Well, for any bird watchers out there, you'll be familiar with the term year list, but essentially for those who aren't, it is a challenge to find and record as many of a certain thing as possible in a set time frame. It could be birds, it could be bees, it could be trains. The idea for a Ladybird year list is absolutely not my own, and I take no credit for it. I owe a big thank you to all-around Ladybird whiz Andrew Jules on Twitter for coming up with such a fantastic idea. It certainly motivated me this year. Inspired by NHSN's Ladybird Spot, I really wanted to join in with this and see what I could find up here in the North East, particularly as we don't really know that much about the ladybirds to be found here. The result, I hear you ask? Well, there you go. Simply put, a fantastic year jam-packed with amazing ladybirds. Now, in this talk, I wanted to share these with you in order, hopefully giving you a feel for what you can find out there in the Northeast and when. We'll cover a little bit about identification and ecology, but not much. This is, after all, a taster session. For that, you can always check out the NHSN website where there's reams of information to satisfy even the most ardent ladybird fan. Let's get started then, shall we? So, starting out here, and in various videos and blogs produced as part of the North East Ladybird Spot, you'll no doubt have heard myself and others saying what an amazing place cemeteries are for ladybirds. This is 100% true, and on a good day in a decent city cemetery, you can hope to see a fantastic variety of species. Of course, lurking around cemeteries looking for ladybirds earn you more than a few funny looks, but the reward is often worth the scrutiny. And these places are particularly great to visit in winter, like right now. And for me, the early days of 2022 were spent predominantly lurking around various cemeteries in Tyneside to see what I could uncover. I must say, usually dragging my partner Matt around too for good measure, much to his annoyance. So coming in at number one there, we have a stereotypical cemetery ladybird, and one which, thanks to its vibrant colour, is pretty hard to miss. So yeah, first up came the orange ladybird. We were lucky to encounter hundreds of these on a visit to North Shields on the 10th of January, having been inspired by sightings in the area shared by you. As well as being rather beautiful, this is quite an interesting ladybird too. Previously, they were rather scarce and associated with ancient woodland. But the species has been rapidly spreading in recent years to colonise other sites boasting broadleaf trees, parks, city streets, because it is readily able to adapt to the species we plant in the urban environment. Known to winter in large groups on gravestones, it is best looked for in cemeteries rich in trees. Sometimes structures close to sycamore or lime can hold many hundreds of them, overwintering in great aggregations. To add just a final note on orange ladybirds, it does look a little like another species you'll see soon, but is best identified by the number and positioning of its spots. If you look at the second row of spots behind the head, close to the pronotum, you'll see it has 4, not 6, white blotches. But more on that very soon. The dreaded number 2. Not everyone's cup of tea, but perhaps the ladybird you're most likely to see in urban areas of our region. It was little surprise that the harlequin ladybird came in next. A non-native species quickly colonising all corners of the North East, but particularly numerous in Newcastle, Sunderland and other cities. This species often gathers in their thousands come winter, making for an interesting but slightly worrying sight. An insanely variable ladybird, you would need an entire presentation in itself to run through the ins and outs of harlequin identification. And even then, you would miss a few forms and variations. In general, however, you could look for a large black ladybird with red spots, or a large red one with lots of black spots. They also have brown legs, but really, how often do you see a ladybird's legs? Back to our native ladybirds now, with this lovely little 2-spot ladybird. As you can see, we found this one tucked away on a gravestone in another cemetery we visited in Jesmond. Now, this is a nice one to identify, at least most of the time in its typical form. This form is a lovely red colour with 2 rounded black spots, making it almost unmistakable. A generalist ladybird, it occupies much the same niche as the larger and more familiar 7-spot, but sadly is now far rarer. The 2-spot being one of the species most affected by the spread of the harlequin ladybird, and one which is now in decline nationally. Slight silver lining, the 2-spot still seems relatively abundant in the North East, at least according to your Ladybird Spot records, but perhaps that is because the harlequin is still relatively new here. We'll see how that pans out in the future, and without doubt, your sightings will help monitor how this future, good or bad, how it unfolds. Onwards to number 4. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier, which looks an awful lot like an orange ladybird, at least on a cloudy day. While poking about Jesmond Cemetery, we were also lucky to encounter several cream spot ladybirds. A really attractive little ladybird with maroon wing cases and creamy spots. Now, this species is associated with woodland, but also seems to be frequent in urban habitats. A bit like the orange ladybird, it favours habitats rich in trees, scrub, and though I'm not sure it's mentioned anywhere else, I found ivy too. Now, most of the time you'll have no trouble at all separating this from the orange ladybird, but in poor light, things get a little bit blurry, quite literally. The best way to know for sure, however, is to count the spots in row 2 again. The cream spot has 6, not 4 like the orange. This is one of those ladybird species which is seldom present in large numbers, making each encounter one to be enjoyed, and it is one which is beginning to flock back to cemeteries now and can be seen right through November into spring. So don't worry, we'll be getting away from cemeteries soon, but just about rounding off another epic day's cemetery exploring. Next up, we were delighted to spot several pine ladybirds. Now, don't be fooled by the name. These are actually a pretty generalist ladybird found everywhere from heathland to woodland and even our gardens. They do like pine, as the name suggests, but are equally at home on a host of broadleaf trees and even shrubs such as gorse. Pine ladybirds are small, black, and have a distinctive rim around the wing cases. Most obvious, however, is the pair of red comma-shaped markings on the front of the wing cases. These, coupled with their general size, set them apart from most other species. I say most because you'll see another which looks somewhat like them later on. Pine ladybird is an interesting species to look at in that prior to the North East Ladybird Spot, there were relatively few records of it in our region. Now, thanks to you, this is changing and we're realising that they are far more widespread than previously thought. A nice addition for number 5 and one that truthfully never gets old. And last but not least, for our cemetery ladybirds, Jesmond Old Cemetery also came up trumps with this fantastic little 10-spot ladybird. Now, excuse the hideous photograph, I am definitely not a photographer, but you should just about make out the creamy red colour characteristic of this typical 10-spot. You'll also note a single spot on its shoulder in row 1. This is a nice way to separate it from other species. Now, if you thought harlequins were bad, 10-spot ladybird is incredibly variable, and some forms can look a lot like the harlequin. However, this species tends to be far smaller as a rule, and equally, they tend not to be present in their hundreds and thousands like harlequins. If you see a great big ball of ladybirds, it is not likely to be 10-spot. 10-spot is a woodland species primarily, but in a tail which is becoming apparent right through this presentation, you are equally fond of overgrown cemeteries and urban habitats, and are another species you're likely to encounter on walks close to home, albeit with a bit of a keen eye. Look around messy and unkempt areas rich in trees, and I'm sure you will find one as the winter goes on. Now, with most of the familiar species out of the way, this is where things begin to get a little bit interesting, particularly as it became necessary to start looking for ladybirds in specific habitats, to start targeting ladybirds, if you will, or at least specific overwintering spots in order to find new and exciting species. Fast forward a few weeks and late January saw me doing just that with a ladybird themed trip to NHSN's own Gosforth Nature Reserve. Looking at the picture here, you might guess which ladybird I had in mind, at least if you've been looking at NHSN blogs over the past year. But before we get into that, just one to get out of the way first. Of course, 7 spots. Your typical large red storybook ladybird. This is without doubt our most familiar ladybird species. A gemless ladybird, they are very common despite recent declines and can be found in a plethora of habitats from woodland to heathland and of course gardens too. In winter, 7 spots often tuck themselves away within vegetation such as gorse and conifers. Exactly where I found this one on my visit to the reserve. The first of many to come throughout the year, and one which quite truthfully requires no further explanation. But for something a little bit more interesting now, and at number 8, we have this handsome little creature, the water ladybird. First true specialist encountered in 2022. As its name suggests, water ladybird can be found within wet habitats, particularly the overgrown margins of lakes and ponds, but also within ditches. In winter, they spend their time tucked away in the leaf sheets of bulrush and common reed, and finding them can be quite the fun challenge. This one was found overwintering atop a snail shell, making quite a nice picture, if anything else. A beige ladybird peppered with black spots. You're highly unlikely to confuse this with anything else, particularly in winter, and you're further helped by its choice of habitat. A little bit more on water ladybirds here, and this map shows my own personal records of this species in 2022. Many of you have, of course, found it at a whole host of other sites too. Prior to the North East Ladybird Spot, records of this species would have you believe that it was in fact rather rare across our region. This does not appear to be the case, however, with ladybirds turning up across many wetlands in Tyneside and South Northumberland. This autumn, I also found water ladybird on Saltmarsh at Holywell Dean in North Tyneside, which came as quite a surprise. And I know others have found them on a whole host of small and rather obscure ponds. It does pay to look, and it surely must be high time that one turns up in North Northumberland. Moving from January into February now, and time didn't really allow for any lengthy surveys or long walks. Instead, the ladybirds found were mostly by chance rather than anything else. Surprise encounters and lucky finds. Despite this, there was still an awful lot to be seen in quiet corners around my local area, a few of which you'll see now. And yes, the picture included here does give something away somewhat, but we'll come to that one very soon. The first real surprise of the year now, this obscure little insect is a red marsh ladybird, a species often found alongside water ladybird near ponds and lakes. Our first inconspicuous ladybird of the season. It is small, red, and truth be told, doesn't look at all like a ladybird. I would forgive you for thinking it was just a beetle. What was most surprising about this sighting was where it took place. Indeed, this ladybird fell from a pine tree whilst looking for pine ladybird in my local park here in Heaton. An odd choice of overwintering site for a wetland species, but hey ho, if ladybirds have shown me anything over the last year, it is that they don't follow convention. To date, I've only found Marsh Ladybird at a handful of sites, even when deliberately looked for, so this really did make this encounter all the more special. It's a nice one now, and rounding the ladybird year list up to a respectable 10 species, this handsome kidney spot ladybird was the first of only 4 spotted this season. A close relative of the pine ladybird we mentioned earlier, this one tends to be a little scarcer, but does look very similar, at least at first. It is equally small, black, and has the distinctive rim around the wing cases too. However, unlike the pine ladybird with its comma-shaped spots, this one has 2 large round spots. Only 2 plonk directly in the centre of the wing cases. Now, kidney spot is a species associated with well-wooded areas and shows preference for ash trees in particular, where it can often be found basking on the trunks come spring. I don't know too much about where they overwinter, but this one was found within a pine tree felled by a recent storm. One of the few bonuses of all that windy weather earlier in the year was that we were able to check these trees for ladybirds. Records from the ladybird spot, show this species does turn up fairly widely in our region, so I would be interested to know whether you have better luck than I when it comes to finding it. A real corker now for number 11, and one of my personal favourites, if I'm allowed to be a little bit biased about ladybirds, that is. This gorgeous little beast here is the striped ladybird, and as you can see, it doesn't look much like any other ladybird you're likely to spot here in the Northeast. You'll notice it is red, like other ladybirds, but instead of spots, it has a series of stripes. It also has a really distinctive chestnut marking on the pronotum behind the head. Now, this is a conifer specialist through and through, and during a trip to Havana Nature Reserve in Newcastle, Matt and I were delighted to find several hanging out on the branches of a large Scots pine. And following that, a walk was also held for NHSN members where we found a further 4 ladybirds. This is another interesting one to take a little bit of a closer look at. And again, this map shows only my records, but hopefully shows that this usually scarce ladybird isn't actually that scarce at all. With few records prior to the ladybird spot, naturalists have been finding it pretty much anywhere sporting a good population of native Scots pine. Actually, even single trees can come up trumps, and those squares shown here in a straight line on the map represent isolated pines growing by the Great North Road between Bedlington and Cramlington. I wouldn't advise anyone else looking for ladybirds along the side of a busy main road, but it does work. You may need a net to search properly for striped ladybird, but I suspect there are many more out there to be discovered, and this species is actually far more widespread. Before moving on, I have also included the image to the left here, because I quite like it really. This shows the rare melanistic form of striped ladybird also found at Havana. A really attractive little thing. It was almost purple and made for quite the surprise when it appeared in the net. We'll start to wrap things up here for this instalment, otherwise you'll be seeing spots for the next 3 years. But coming in at number 12, we have this vibrant little fella here. The 22 spot ladybird, which owing to its bright yellow colour, this is one that you shouldn't mix up with pretty much anything else. But it is useful to remember that spots of this species are round, not square, as in 14 spot ladybird, which you'll see in next week's presentation. Well, a little bit further on than I would have liked, actually. It was quite hard to find this year. Quite a common ladybird in our region, though one at the northern edge of its UK range here. 22 spot is pretty easy to find during the summer. You simply look for plants covered in powdery mildew, the chosen food of this species. In winter, things get a little bit trickier, however, but they can be found among dense vegetation. This one, in fact, several were discovered by shaking a messy patch of stinking iris in my local park, and you could find them within tussocks, gorse, or even ornamental grasses, though it does help to have a sheet or a net to catch the contents of those bushes as you're shaking them. And please do remember to put the ladybirds back as well. Second to last now, and a grand little ladybird for lucky number 13. This handsome little insect is the Adonis ladybird, or variegated ladybird if you like American names. I guess I can sort of see why that comes from, with the lovely pattern of black on white on the pronotum. Adonis ladybird is a predominantly southerly species, currently spreading north in the UK. It is traditionally associated with dry, often calcareous grassland, but readily adjusts to dry and somewhat grotty brownfield sites in cities. Owing to its love of dry habitats, it is perhaps no surprise that I found this one at Havana Nature Reserve, a site rich in bone-dry heathland. And with this species becoming increasingly common locally, it is important to note that you can recognise it by its distinctive pronotum pattern of black and white, but also by the concentration of spots towards the rear of the wing cases, two of which, as you can see here in the picture, appear rather larger than the others. Now, if you're not sick of pine trees already, you will be now. Now, in various videos, blogs and resources shared by NHSN over the last year, you'll no doubt have heard me talking an awful lot about conifers. You might wonder why, but simply put, they are a fantastic place to find a whole manner of interesting ladybirds, mainly because evergreen needles offer fantastic cover from winter weather, whereas broadleaf trees, of course, have no leaves the majority of the time in winter. Searching conifers at sites across Newcastle and Northumberland has been a real theme this year for me, and the ladybirds you'll see now represent just a few of my luckier finds, and of course some of the species that you could find too if you choose to go out and look. And kicking off our hunt for conifer ladybirds, but ending today's talk, unfortunately, we have this little corker right here. Species only previously known from a handful of sites in the northeast. The 18-spot ladybird is perhaps best known, is perhaps one of the best examples of how your records are really making a difference for our knowledge of ladybirds in our region. Already, you've revealed around a dozen new locations for this species in just over 2 years. Now, I found the 4 ladybirds pictured here on a gravestone in Jesmond Old Cemetery, a site which is quickly becoming the ladybird capital of the northeast, I must say. Conveniently under a pine tree, and this species is, after all, a specialist of conifers. Pretty unmistakable, this ladybird has lovely maroon wing cases and creamy spots, but it is worth noting that these are arranged differently to the cream spot ladybird you saw earlier and include 2 elongate markings towards the pronotum at the front. It is a lovely one to finish on, I think, and one which never fails to bring a smile every time I see it. Right, so I think I'll wrap this talk up there. Thank you all for watching or listening. And I hope you're not completely ladybirded out and are feeling a little bit inspired to head out and look for some of these yourself this winter. It has been lovely sharing with you some of my own ladybird highlights from across the northeast this year, but of course there are many more out there to be found. Next time, we'll look at another bunch of ladybirds that I am loosely terming here the small, the scarce and the spotty, and I'll hope you'll join us for that short talk too. But just to finish on, just a quick reminder that the North East Ladybird Spot is still ongoing. If you're out and about and see a ladybird, we'd love to hear from you. Taking part really is great fun and everyone can help. So please do grab family and friends and head out there ladybird hunting. More information, of course, on how to take part can be found on the NHSN website. But for now, a really big thank you, and I'll see you next time.